We're going to get started. I'm Denise Heyman, PTA President here at Juan Cabrillo, and I would like to introduce Mark Caption with the Fillmore Group.
Okay, thank you. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to meet with all of you today. Just by way of a little bit of background, as the question was asked, what's your background? So I'm been an environmental consultant for about 30 years now. I'm what's it's called a certified industrial hygienist by training. So we are responsible for looking at exposures to various agents, whether they're chemical, biological, ionizing radiation, non-ionizing radiation, things like that, and making an assessment as far as those potential health impacts associated with those exposures. Just by approach and way, I think it's important philosophically, before I get into the specifics of of an update, is that when I approach a situation like this, when I'm working in the school district, I happen to have 4 granddaughters under the age of 4. And so I'm looking at that in terms of any kind of recommendation or context as if my kids were, or my grandkids were in the school. I think it's important because that way it helps frame for me any kind of recommendation. Now, the role that I play here too is, and I'm glad that Nancy Lee is here, she's one of the members of the task force. So I really work with the task force in that regard, and they are in fact, I'm not sure what you, just wait for a second. Yeah, okay.
We're going to tape with the school district, so if you're with the news, you're more than welcome to be in here, but we're asking that we don't videotape right now. We're going to videotape it.
Anyway, I was saying that, so I really was, well, I hired by the district, I'm really this, if you want to look at it this way, the staff person to the task force that was the Malibu Environmental Task Force that was put together to work through this. And that task force is made up of teachers and students and parents, as well as district officials as well. And that group has done, I would say, a very good job of working through some of the questions and issues and representing you as a parent body pretty well, I think. I mean, we have somebody here, you can ask her. But I think that group has worked well together, and we'd be able to progress as far as, we had 2 members of the task force, that's great. And I think it's done a good job, and it's brought us to where we are pretty much today.
Who are the members of the task force? I'm sorry.
So, I mean,
Their person?
the specific, with 2 members of the task force, want to stand up? Then you can know who they are. And Dr. Right.
Pardon me?
I'm
Right,
Nancy
three.
Lee. I'm a teacher here and a parent at Malibu High.
Yeah, I'm Lily Piper. I'm the bilingual community liaison at Malibu High School, Juan Cabrillo, and I'm also the former parent and Malibu City president.
Okay. So those are the 3 folks, and then Dr. Hertner is the third. And then in addition to that, to say we have a teacher from Malibu High's on there, and we have the superintendent, the associate superintendent, the principal. We have 4 parents, right? 4 parents as well. So, and I think there's a list. It's probably official and out there. You can
it's
take
out
it.
there.
But anyway, my role in that regard is really to bring information to the group and to try to provide that information, and you really maybe, I wouldn't say even lead the discussion. This group is a pretty independent group. They lead their own discussions a lot of times. So I'm really there to try to help answer certain questions. So that's the general role that I play. In so doing, what the group has done is it's come up with a sampling plan to look at various environmental concern, or address various environmental concerns. You know, we did, the starting point of this was sat down with some of the teachers who had some issues, and we used that information to help start the process of formulating the plan. The parents in the task force got input from the community, and they presented their concerns. and then that plan, that initial plan was put together. And I want to emphasize the fact that this was an initial plan in the sense that it's not the end, it's just depending on the results that come back, we may go further and depending on what we see. So, where we are to date is that we did over the last couple of weeks, we've done some sampling both at the high school and here at Cabrillo. The materials we monitored for were radon, which is a naturally occurring gas that here in Malibu, the state of California has done mapping throughout the state in terms of where they found some, beliefs have found some naturally occurring radon. And this area was considered a low to moderate level. So we wanted to check and see if that was in fact the case. So we did it both at the high school and we sampled here at Cabrillo. We also did certain what we call indoor environmental quality factors. So these are mostly comfort issues. We looked at relative humidity and temperature, general dust levels in the rooms, and then also carbon dioxide levels, because carbon dioxide is an indicator of really how effective the ventilation is working given the occupant load, mainly the number of people in the classroom. Then we also looked at electromagnetic fields primarily from cathode ray tubes from computers, because it was raised as a concern by one of the teachers, or one of the staff, I think, from here at Cabrillo. So we looked at that as well. So that information has now come in. We've presented a raw data information to the task force today. So the task force has asked me to go ahead and write up a summary of this information, and then that information, that summary, as well as the raw data, we hope to get out by, the goal is by early next week, and that'll go out and it'll go up onto the website. And you can look at the data, you read the summary, or both, and then you'll have some context for it. We also expect next week sometime, or by next week, to have PCB information. When we did PCB monitoring at the high school, the reason we chose the high school, at least initially, to look at is because, of course, that's where there had been some PCBs identified in the soil around the quad area. And the buildings there are of a similar age as the buildings here. Actually, some of the buildings here are a little bit older, but PCBs were used starting in the 1940s in building materials, and they were used up until 79 when they were banned. And again, based on the findings we see there, that will help us dictate what we do going forward, not only for Malibu High School, but for Cabrillo, but also, that this is an issue since many buildings in the district are of the same vintage, we may be finding the same thing. So a lot of what we're doing here in Malibu and at Cabrillo is going to really also have some bearing, I think, based on what the district superintendent had said and others it's okay, going forward to the whole district. It's not, and the issues that we're confronting here are not specific to this district. I happen to be in New York, because that's where my kids and grandkids are last week or so, and I had the opportunity to speak with the division director, what they call the Industrial and Environmental Hygiene Unit of the New York Schools Construction Authority. And these folks are the ones who have responsibility for basically any kind of remodeling or any work that's done in the schools, and they also own the PCB program. And they've been doing this now for several years because they've been under a consent decree by the EPA saying that you have to deal with it. Their main issue there, it's interesting, it started off with building materials, but it got into ballast in the ceiling. And that's really what's driven most of what's happening back in, certainly in New York. And that's where we're headed. The good news here is we've just been, one of the things we're doing as part of the review is to see if there are ballasts where what ballasts are there. And the good news is that we've almost completed this complete survey, probably 95% done, and we haven't found any PCB-containing ballasts. They'd all been changed out. There was a program several years ago, some money that was released to do that. So that's helpful so that when we get the results back certainly for the air sampling, that means that that's one less thing to have to look at as part of the source depending on the results. So that's been particularly helpful as well. So that PCB data, as I said, we should have the results come through sometime next week. It's going to be a lot of data. And one of the things we talked about, I think, at the previous meeting at the high school, and there had been requests for this, is that for every sample that we take, there's going to be 209 data points because we are analyzing for each what we call a congener of PCB. Congener means basically for lack of a better term, not a species but a type. Different congeners means really it has to do with the concentration of chlorine in PCBs. That's where PCB stands for polychlorinated biphenyls. And this really reflects to the concentration of chlorine in it. So if I say you'll see in the data that'll come out, it may say Arcalor 1254. So that means in that particular thing, there's 54% chlorine in that particular species or congener. So anyway, there's going to be a lot of data. I mean, and so we have to kind of wade through it depending on what the numbers look like. We have to take that in and decipher it and make some judgments on it. But we hope to release that as soon as possible, as soon as we can get that and look at it and make some sense of it. And as I say, the district and the task force feels that it's important to have some summary involved, especially when you're having so much data. And then you'll have the raw data to look at it. Anyone will have an opportunity to see it. But at the same time, I know that wading through 800 pages or 1,000 pages of information most people don't want to do that. So we will provide some sort of a summary of the information and go from there. So I think that that's kind of where we're at right now. And I'm really here mostly to take questions. If I can answer them for you, I'd be happy to do so. Some questions may be better answered by district officials, and we'll try to capture those and send them over to them if I can't answer them. Okay? So.
What have you found out about radon gas? What was in the report you gave the task force?
So radon was not found to be present in terms of any concentrations above the limit. We found that some of this information, in terms of the averaging, the way we took it, that there was one location. It was no classrooms. One location we found right at the limit for a closet. It was a custodial closet. The custodial closet. It's here. It's here at the Cabrillo. No, not there.
Not the costume closet?
No, it's fine. It's fine. If we did, I'm not sure if we tested that closet,
Did
but
you test that one? Because that was the one from when they dug up the...
yeah, that's for radon. That wouldn't have, the way that radon works is what we did is we set these things out into 2 of these per building, 2 of these canisters per building. And what we're looking for, again, because it's naturally occurring, we're trying to see is there spots in the area that would be subject to some of this radon, And basically, we didn't find anything. As a matter of fact, I consulted with someone who's called a health physicist, a certified health physicist, and that's what they do. Most of the time they do with nuclear material. But he looked at it and said, there's no issue here. So when you have a problem, you again know that you got a problem. The guy's based up in New Hampshire, which is adjacent to Vermont, where they have a lot of granite. And in Vermont, they got a lot of it. So yeah, that's it.
So the radon testing covered what area on both?
You'll see that it covered basically every building, or nearly every building on both campuses.
Inside.
Inside, right. You have to.
But how do you get in the classroom?
That's okay. So here's how we do it. First of all, you try to do this in a worst case scenario. You put the canisters out. We did this over a weekend, so we wouldn't have people coming in and out. You put the canisters out, you button up the building as tight as you can, you put the lights on to heat the area up. And the weekend we did it was a pretty warm weekend. It was up in the mid to upper 70s, which is probably almost as warm as it gets here, though the last few days have been a little warmer, but that's a pretty warm period of time. And then we let it go for 48 hours, collect it, send it to the lab.
But you didn't do it in room 1?
I have to-
That's where the teacher was back.
You know, I have to look and see. I don't remember, frankly, where it was at.
Was it done in one room per building?
2 rooms per building.
And was that just randomly chosen?
Correct.
See, I guess that's my question. Now, when I asked you what area was covered, and you said almost everything, but now you're saying it was just one room or 2 rooms per building. What's the big difference
2 rooms
in
per
that?
building.
2 rooms per building, and how many rooms are there per building? So in other words, what isn't being there?
Oh.
I'll ask the question a different way.
Right.
What area hasn't been tested?
So these represent, because they were randomly chosen, the idea is that because the way radon works, it's a gas. So if we find it in different places, there's a good chance that it's going to be in other locations as well. In other words, if it was present, we would, based on the number of places we looked at, we would have found it. You know, so it's not. It was enough coverage to say, and that was based again on the input we got from the certified health physicist.
So you're saying you did a random sampling, but the random sampling was wide enough that you feel as though.
Correct.
In room 1 would be covered.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was in room 1, but the idea was that certainly the building that room 1 was in was there, and it was probably
Somewhere in the theater building.
No, the room 1
his E building, wasn't it?
is, it's Bridget who has the.
Yeah, E building. Yeah, so we did.
And the ones who finished, and all the journals
Right.
this summer.
Right.
And that's why I'm concerned,
Right.
because it's
But
now this summer.
with radon, you don't necessarily even need to expose anything. It's gonna permeate up. You know, anytime you have, for example,
That makes it big.
like a pipe going into pipe going into the foundation or stuff. I mean, it's a gas. So any place a gas can go and permeate in, it would find its way in if it was there. You know, it's almost, you know, just like a gas moves all the way. That's why I'm saying that if it was present, it would move between rooms and between building, you know, etc.
Through the walls?
Oh yeah. I mean, any place
If
there's
you're shutting down a room, then it should be.
no room is airtight. Like I say, we have the plumbing goes into the ground. Anything that, again, that has a relationship into the ground, it's going to be able to come up and get up there. Yes.
Are there basements anywhere on our property?
And I
High
know it.
school, elementary,
You
is
know-
there any basements here? No.
I was going to say, the only area where there's an under-the-ground area is the computer lab, which is below the existing library.
Over on the middle school?
Over at Malibu High School, the library, you see the library, you walk in those double doors.
Right.
If you go one more door over, you go downstairs, and there's like a
Oh,
lab,
yeah.
a computer lab.
Right.
And some areas down there, but other than that, I don't think we have.
Yeah, and we only sampled on the first floor so that there's no point doing it on the second floor because we want to catch it. Yes.
What were the ranges of concentrations that you found?
Oh, they range from the detection limit to, as I say, we found one at 4.2.
One at 4. But
Most of them were down in the, I would say, the 1 and 1.5 area, something like that. I mean, you look at the data. I don't want to. I didn't run any means or analysis. I mean, a lot of this data just came in. So.
Can I ask you something? One day I have a message from Paul Rosenfeld. He wanted to know if you, he asked me today to ask you, when are you going to send him the test results since you gave it to the task force?
Well, as I say, the data I have now, I don't have any PCB data. Okay, I only have
He
the.
just wanted the canisters. Isn't that the radar?
Oh yeah, so that'll be available early this coming week when I write this summary.
Before the meeting, so that he has a chance to see it? I think he was
Which
a little upset
which
that
meeting?
everybody else knew it, Marty.
Which meeting?
That when you're gonna announce the test results.
Oh, I'm
22nd.
Oh, that. Oh,
He would
okay.
like to
Yeah,
know
yeah, yeah.
beforehand, so
No,
he
we're
can
gonna.
do it.
Right. The directive that I was given by the task force was to write a summary, and we'll put a summary on that and release it out, and it'll be out early next week, which will be for the.
So you'll send that to Dr. Rose?
Well,
Lyons said that's what they
Yeah,
would
I'm
be
s-
talking to.
Well, I spoke to him about an hour ago, and he didn't even know about the meeting, and he didn't.
I- Yeah, I'm just,
Heard-
It wasn't
I,
even informed about this meeting.
This meeting's been pretty widely publicized.
Really? Because
Yes.
nobody I know, even the teachers involved, got anything.
Oh, I've
The
been
other-
getting letters for the past
Not
at
from
least
Monte
week
Rio,
or so.
maybe that's it. The other question I have.
well, let me finish answering your question, okay? So just for process, I send the results to the district, and then they in turn distribute the information. So that's, and then the task force has agreed to send this out early next week. So that's where the information I'm talking about today, that's where that's going to be.
You sent it to Dr. Rosenfeld?
I won't.
But yeah, I believe that, you know, they
And also, I think we should clarify that this meeting was called as an opportunity to inform Cabrillo parents, because now that the scope of things went from just Malibu High School to include Cabrillo.
It actually said, I
And-
saw the meeting, it
Right.
said out the parents too. It actually did in the.
Because we had a meeting like this at Malibu High School not that long
I know,
ago.
and they were gone to real parents, including you
Right.
there.
Right,
So,
so,
and you did advertise that it was, you know.
For both,
Yeah.
Do you
Anyway,
have a problem with it?
no, not at all. I'm just saying, that's something I wanted to
Supposed to be
clarify that
protecting my children.
no, I'm not arguing with you at all. I'm
I
just
just have one more
saying
question.
that this was a meeting that the task force really wanted to address Cabrillo parents' concerns, because we didn't feel that there had been something here on
Glenn
campus.
speaking for some of the parents too, we couldn't make it, so you know about the men. So my big question is the soil. You promised, and the task force had promised to check the soil, because 3 years ago, was it, we had, the district, not you, but the district found, let's see, arsenic, cadmium, lead, benzene, toluene, DDT, chlorodyne, 3 years ago in the soil. That was discovered. So we really need the soil tested. And also because they dug up the classrooms 2 weeks before school started this year and didn't test that soil, nor did they worry about making sure the workers were protected, knowing that this is here.
so
But
let
you're
me,
going to test the
let-
soil like you said, right?
well, I didn't say anything like that. My understanding, the soil that had the PCBs in it was dug up and removed.
5 feet, what about the 6 foot,
Well,
7 foot,
remember-
8 foot?
remember
It wasn't
the-
tested at all.
Well, remember, in the quad area was also
Around the
checked.
building.
Well, in the quad area, in the quad itself, it was negative, it wasn't found.
Just the perimeter they tested on, that's all they tested was just the perimeter.
Well,
Then they dug down some dirt from the perimeter
And
and
it wasn't
said,
all
oh, it's
they did.
okay. And they didn't bother to test the rest of that area. They didn't bother to test
But
other
according to
sites.
Hugh Hoffman, it wasn't all negative, right? He's got mapped out where it was.
Well,
I'm sure he'll send it to you.
Well, I'm happy to look at it. At
Yeah,
this
'cause
point, as I
EPA is
say,
concerned now, so then the
They're
parents
working
are
on it in
concerned.
Washington.
So we want to know if it's been tested and when the results are going to be released.
well, all the testing that's done so far, I've told you about. We have not done any additional soil
And you're
testing.
not going to?
No, I didn't say that. All I said is, all we've done so far is this. And once these data come in, then all the data will be evaluated, and then further steps will be taken at that time.
Will you be doing the soil testing, or you think not?
I don't know. In other words, at this point, we're looking.
What do you think at this point?
I couldn't even, in other words, we have all this information coming in. And again, I can't tell you what I would do, because all this has to do with the task force.
When it was removed, wasn't it removed in a hazmat mobile
No.
with, no?
So let me answer this question.
No, there was no.
It was-
That's
Wait,
why the
the-
EPA is involved.
wait, no, wait, no, no.
They're very angry about it.
Let me clarify this, okay? If you read the Arcadis report, and I encourage you to do so,
I'm ready.
and I spoke with the Arcadis people, and the project manager who was on the site said the following. The reason why, first of all, a couple things happened. There's the area that was actually dug up, and then there's an area probably 10 or 12 feet that's called the exclusion zone. So no one's allowed in that area. There are monitors that were put around the perimeter of that area, testing for dust and also for PCBs. I believe they were men who were doing the removal were in protective gear only for the point of their skin, because the levels in the ground were low enough that it didn't warrant more coverage than that.
the levels were 11 times PCB.
So there was no respiratory protection?
They didn't, again, we did the monitoring, there was no PCBs found in the air during the monitoring.
Yeah.
So
Which monitoring, I'm sorry?
during the excavation, while they were digging it up, they were monitoring the area around it, and there was no PCBs found. That's in the report, you can look at it. So, because I wasn't there, I have to go on what was in the report.
See that?
Yeah, and and typically what happens, there's like 4 levels of protection. They were in the lowest level because, again, even though the concentration suggested removal, it still was not at the level that warranted a higher upgrade. At least at the time, that's what the Arcadis health and safety personnel decided.
Who was it at Arcata that decided that?
You have to look, if you look at the report, there's a couple names on there. I spoke to her, it's Stephanie, she was a toxicologist. She was a toxicologist on it. You could see her name on there, I just don't remember.
But you spoke to not the project manager, but the toxicologist.
Well, she was part of the project. The person who was the principal on Chart had left Arcadis, has left. So,
I just need to make an
Yeah.
announcement. So we are being videotaped, and this is going to be available to view by this weekend. It will be publicly available. So we're asking no one to videotape right now, but it will be available. So anything that you're seeing right now.
I'm confused why you're concerned about videotaping and if it's publicly available.
Press wasn't allowed in, and press was making a big deal about the fact that other people were allowed to make about that. It was a decision made by PTA.
no, the press is allowed here. They're here. It's just we didn't, because it'd be consistent to be with the previous thing, we just didn't have them videotape.
Right.
Well, they're here. They're here. There's 2 or 3 of them. They're here.
I don't care. I want to ask you, actually, no.
You go with
I
them.
just really will press you at this point because I know I'm working with the EPA in Washington. It's the soil stupid is what they keep saying to me.
Well, as I say, we'll take up all these, once we get through this initial evaluation.
I have a
we'll-
question, though. There was some testing done for PCBs now that you're waiting for the results on.
Right.
Where was that testing taken?
So that was focused on the rooms around the quad in the high school, middle school.
Okay.
And mainly because we looked at it in where the removal had occurred. Because the hypothesis is that those materials found in the soil were from building materials. That's the working hypothesis. Okay, so we're doing this testing to find out if that's true or not. So we're looking at the bulk material, that is like the caulking or building materials, see what levels are in there. We also did wipe samples to see if any of the material has gotten from, through dust or whatever onto the surfaces. And then
That's why I was
air.
worried about the costumes because there was dust and the kids came straight to school and they put all these dusty costumes
Right.
on. And Bridget was told by Dr. Block or Mr. Block, the principal, oh, don't worry about it. And
Yeah.
then they released a month later that maybe we should worry about it.
Right, I hear you.
And no one has tested room 1 or that soil.
So both, one and two, I think they're both, one's behind the other?
Yeah,
So-
Mr. Breen's old class, Mr. Breen.
Right, so both of those,
All my kids are.
I know that both of those were part of the PCB testing.
I've been there 15 years, and I'll tell you, it's personal to me, because 15 years, those 3 kids have been there 3 years each.
Sure.
And the youngest was there hanging around, because I volunteered all the time. Mr. Breen was the best history teacher you could have had. He's gone, he's retired. And Bridget is the best drama teacher in the whole world, changed my kids' lives. And
Right.
they're at UC Berkeley and UC Irvine. Amazing teachers. So not only do I care for them, but I'm concerned that while you had that thing open, or while the dirt was there, my son loves to roll around in the dirt, the youngest, that's what he does. And he's a soccer player. So I'm worried also about the soil up on the field because EPA has reason to believe that the football field and soccer field up there are also contaminated.
I believe there were some,
I'm not allowed to say
I believe there's some soil testing that was done as part of Arcadis. I have to go back and look at that again, but I believe
because
it was
he
done.
said that's a huge issue.
Right, okay.
Yeah, can you explain how many samples were taken, how many white samples were taken, how many copper samples were taken, and did you take 2?
Yeah, we took paint too.
Okay, per room.
Right. So we took, fundamentally, I can tell you per room, I don't remember off the top, there was a lot of samples. I think we basically took at least one sample inside, one sample outside. Now one of the things we're interesting finding is it looks like a lot of the the material that's around the windows is actually not caulk, it's a rubberized material. So we'll find that out too. But we took samples to see if that was actually PCB containing. So we took one inside, one outside. We took a wipe sample.
One inside, one outside.
Right, or whatever was around the windows.
Okay.
You know, whatever material was around the windows. And then a wipe sample inside on a horizontal surface that's adjacent to it. We took at least, I think, a paint sample, and then the air samples. So there,
Just one wipe per room?
I believe one or two, maybe two wipes
All
per
the
room.
rooms, like both schools?
All rooms that well, we didn't sample here.
Okay.
Okay, we only sampled in there, and every room that we sampled, we did the same thing.
Okay, so there again, could you clarify every room that you sampled? Is
Right.
that every room?
No.
Is that every room you sampled?
Every room we sampled. We took some, and actually, the truth is, we followed Dr. Rosenfeld's prescription. You know, he actually ID'd the rooms, and we said that's fine. We went ahead and did that. I think we made one slight change because we wanted to get 1 and 2 because of the digging. But other than that, it was exactly whatever he had prescribed, and that's what we used as our plan.
I have the photo of the digging in the classrooms before school started.
So we should, if there's any residual dust, we should pick that up in our sample.
But nothing like on the floors for dust?
Yeah, I think we did one on the surface and then one on the floors. I have to go back and look on that, but yeah, that was part of what we did. You'll see what we did. I think we tried to get one or two horizontal surfaces and a couple of
And those
vertical surfaces.
Lines in the walls.
We didn't go. We took. Let's say we had like floors. Yeah, we figured we'd try and do the air sample stuff, and we'll see if we find that the wipe samples, you know, are positive. Then we'll go back and do more. So again, this was an initial survey. See, you know, do we have an issue or do we not? And do enough of these to
Would
see.
this be able to define if we have absolutely no issue at all?
I think at this point, we'll have to look and see what the data show, if it says no issue. I mean, I'm confident that if there's an issue, we'll probably be able to have identified it, at least to some extent here. Trying to say it's not an issue, usually you have to do additional evaluation. Proving the negative is always a little bit more effortful that way. But, you know, obviously, if the numbers if they all come out without if the caulk all comes out negative, you know, and if everything else is negative, then that would certainly point in a certain direction, clearly, if it happens that way.
And that would pick up room 1 in the costumes the kids had on.
Well, we did room 1 and we did room 2. So
Oh, I thought you
Well, if it was coming out of the dirt, which tested positive, the caulk is kind of irrelevant. I mean, yes, it could be adding to it, but the big issue is the dirt right outside the rooms. It's been there for all those years.
right. So that's why we did the wipe samples, because if
Did
it.
you do air samples too?
Oh yeah. Oh
So
yeah.
you did
Yeah.
white
For
samples
every
in
room as
Yeah,
well?
yeah. Everything we did the same in each of the rooms. Yeah, we did
For every
every,
room as well?
every room that we sampled.
Every room you sampled. Okay, so back to the,
Right, every room we sampled.
All right,
Yes, sir.
sorry, forgive me, I'm a little late to the party.
Okay.
But what I read is that you were testing for radon, but you were not testing for PCBs in any way, not through the air or not in the soil.
Yeah, well, I addressed it a little earlier, but
Yeah, I'm
I'll say
sorry.
that's okay.
I maybe
Right.
repeat that because that seems like the most important thing.
Right. The reason we looked at this was an initial survey that we did because we knew that there were some issues with PCBs because of the soil sampling. So we're going to look at these results, and because we know that the buildings are of about the same vintage, roughly, then we'll either look at doing more sampling here, or we might just say whatever program we have there to contain or remediate will just automatically apply here. In other words, this program, and I'll go back and give you an example that the New Yorkers do because they've got about 3 or 4 years on this. What they've done is they've rolled in their asbestos management, lead paint management, and PCB program, kind of an overall called operations and maintenance program. So when they go into a building, they'll characterize the building for those 3 things, and then they will manage all 3 of those things a little bit different ways, but it's the same kind of program. And so the way that one of the ways that you manage PCBs is you can encapsulate it or contain it, especially if it's caulk. Obviously, if it's ballast, you got to take the ballast out. But so that's a process. So again, going forward, depending on what we find, we may do more testing. We may do testing here as well, because there's certain things in terms of characterizing the buildings in different ways. Maybe there's some different things we need to look at. So nothing's been ruled out as far as additional. We just wanted to get this done pretty quickly, get some information in, and then decide going forward, just like any other parameter. Okay, let me just make sure I answer your question.
Well, I mean, I guess the only follow-up to that is, I mean, it seems like you've already made the supposition that it comes from the building and building materials rather than soil. If it were part of the soil, then you could see it being a larger swath.
Right.
The building, then,
Right.
would be very particular.
Well, and that's...
But how do you know? I mean, what is giving you that information right now?
Well, that's...
Other than it's around the perimeter.
Right, so that was the hypothesis. So we're working under this hypothesis that it's
But
from
that
building
shouldn't
materials.
sway
Okay.
that you're looking at soil samples from other areas.
Well, we did look at, Arcadis looked at other areas, and it was negative inside the quad area. So part of that is, okay, it's not, well, certain samples of PCB in the center point of it was not found.
All the samples that were at the center point were negative, you're saying?
I have to look and see, but for most part, when
Because the camera's on, I just wanted to say
no, I'm
that.
saying, I have to go back and look at it. But my understanding was most of those concentrations that were found on the perimeter of the classroom.
Yes, but some of the center were positive as well.
I think they were low below the detection limit. Were they were elevated? Well, no, I'm talking about PCBs now. I want to hold to
These are
PCBs.
poisons, these are things that cause problems.
I understand, but
Our children.
I want to, the question was about PCBs, and I want to be able to address it because it's a different strategy for different materials. Again, one of the things we're trying to find out is where's the source of this material.
Right.
So that's why what we're working on now is to find out, is this a location? Because the distribution of the PCBs was such that if it had been fill material, you would have expected to find it more broadly dispersed and at deeper levels. Most of the concentrations were pretty shallow. And so...
But that sounds like it could also be agriculture, like that you were saying this land was agricultural land before, if it's really shallow.
Right, and that's why you would normally find, that's why they look for pesticides.
Pesticides.
Right, but not, PCBs, the sources of PCBs are relatively limited because they were manufactured. They started manufacturing PCBs in like 1927 and 29, and they were originally used in electrical equipment, transformers and things like that.
Why were they banned?
Why?
And they were banned in 69 or 79?
79.
And why were they banned?
Well, because of its potential, health effects that are associated with
What
it.
health effects do you mean?
Well, it depends. There are certain things affecting the liver. Skin is one of the main issues, and then of course there's a cancer potential with that. For it so far, we found it in primarily in occupational exposed groups. Yeah. But yeah, so those are the main reasons for it. There is, if you want information about PCBs, the EPA has a very good fact sheet that you can see, and we'll be making that link available so you can read up as much as you like about that and about the background in that area. So you'll get all the information there. Yes?
Yeah, as you know, I'm a little troubled about the limited information that's been out about health effects, and so far I have heard nothing about the reproductive effects. And PCBs have been listed as reproductive toxins on Prop 65 list since 1991.
So
And those are not high level.
And that's when our kids are going for
at low
hormones.
levels.
that's what I'm saying. So I would encourage you to look at the fact sheet. I'm sorry, I was throwing out some things. It wasn't necessarily comprehensive. And so I missed, no, it's all right. I mean, it was not intended to be
I
comprehensive.
have a request though in that
Yes.
regard.
Yeah.
It feels as though you're kind of pushing the issue back to the parents, and these are parents.
Sure.
Many of them are working parents, and we're also lay people.
Right.
So to push the responsibility back into this group to say, go do your research, go to the website, go figure out this and that is frustrating.
No,
I think,
right.
hold on for a second.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that the parents want is they want clarity, they want transparency,
Sure.
and they want facts.
Sure.
So
They
we
want
are
the soul
looking to
test.
you.
Right.
You've been hired hired as an expert, so
Right.
we're looking to you for information and for facts.
Right.
So when you push that back or defer it and say, go look somewhere else, figure it out yourself, that's frustrating.
Yeah,
It's-
I appreciate that, thank you. So I only meant to say that if you wanted additional information outside of what we were providing, it's one of the reasons that,
This is a form to provide.
right,
And
so,
one of the questions is being asked.
Right.
You know, what are the potential risks?
right, so that information will be included in the report that we send out. That's one of the reasons that we are putting summary and other information on this information that we're putting out. In other words, it's not the full report, because that'll be down the road. Huh?
We can- you know,
Right, a lot of people don't want. So that's why we're not just sending out raw data, because without some summary. So rest assured that any information that we put out will have some discussion about that, so you can read it and look at it.
But even in a form like this, it would be helpful if you were
Right.
also an educator.
Right, so that's what I'm hoping to do. Yeah, so,
One of the reasons that people are here today
Sure.
is to become more educated. on
right,
this
and if there's
topic.
questions that, I mean, if I didn't answer the question clearly, then please, I appreciate your asking, I'm happy to try to restate it. Yes.
I was going to say, I think one thing us as parents can do, not about the PCBs, but at least about the worry about toluene and benzene, is to also understand that benzene is present in gasoline, and that's why they have the little signs, carcinogens, so if you're filling up your car with your kids in it, you might want to reconsider not having them there when you fill your car.
But at least you know
And
if your kids
also,
are
toluene is the main component of nail polish, so again, all these things, we all have to worry about in our environment, and also at our school, but, kind of the things that come.
I appreciate that, but the truth is, they do put warnings up, and nobody put any warnings when the kids were rolling for all these years. And I don't let them use nail polish, so I use it.
I don't think
We
we
don't
need
let our
that
kids
in
roll
all
around in
these
the gas station either,
Yeah,
so.
well, definitely
I hear,
not rolling
I
on
hear.
the gas station.
I did one quick question, though. There was two 10,000-gallon tanks removed off the Malibu High School property.
Right.
Has there been any research done to figure out what was in those
They were
tanks? I
leaking.
know that they were leaking, and they were leaking, some pretty nasty chemicals,
I
a lot
believe-
of which she mentioned.
Right, I believe there were fuel tanks, I'd have to go back. Again, that's in the Arcadis
But they were
report.
leaking with the
Fuel
whole
tanks for
dirt
who?
around it.
For the bus, it was back for the bus.
When did that happen?
Yeah,
That
what-
was just, I think, 5 years ago, 5 or 9 years ago.
I don't know when-
There's
I don't know when
three
they pulled
different
that.
events, and I can, also, I wanted to tell you, the EPA is involved, and Hugh Kaufman at the EPA would gladly answer anybody's questions too, rather than going on his website, because he wrote that, actually. He was one of the founders of the EPA. And so he would gladly answer anybody's questions by email.
Yeah, I'm just trying to again, there are many resources. I mean, we've had, fortunately, we have people in our task force who've really spent a lot of time independently researching this information. And one of the benefits, in speaking to Jennifer Nicola today, was actually saying that the fact that the more she was able to dig in, and she's done a lot of work. I mean, I'm not expecting everybody to do this now.
She was with the EPA, she said she spoke to the EPA, but I
It's
can't
Peter-
find anybody at the EPA.
What was his
she
name?
spoke to.
Peter, I don't remember his first name. Peter. You might ask her.
That's the transparency we're
Well,
talking
yeah.
about.
Yeah, ask her.
If they are speaking to the EPA, we'd like to know who they are speaking
Yeah,
to.
because
Yeah.
I'm working with
Yeah,
the
ask her.
office in Washington.
I just
and they're
remember-
asking me who she's
I know
speaking to,
Jennifer's
wouldn't say
in
that.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
don't
she'll,
seem to be aware
she'll tell
either.
you. Yeah, she's done a lot of research, and I think it's helpful to have this. Peter, and I forget, she'll give it to you. He's in Region 9. He's in the San
Region
Francisco.
9? Okay. Is it San Francisco?
Yeah. So,
I
but
guess the goal, the thing to me that you have to state is, are you going to find the source? Is that your goal? And if it is it going to be definitive? You're going to say, okay, it was in the building materials, it's not in soil writ large.
Right.
It's just in the building materials of that school.
right. The goal.
Clarity, the
Right.
thing I'm concerned about is getting a report at the end of the day that says, yes, there were elevated PCBs in this area, they've been removed,
Right.
everything's fine.
The goal.
And not knowing where.
Right. The goal is to ensure a healthy and safe environment for the students, the faculty, and the staff. That's the goal, regardless of what the agent is.
But the air is not being tested here. You're not testing the air, and you're not testing.
We haven't done it yet. I'm not saying
I don't
we're.
understand
gonna be
why.
done?
Why aren't we doing that? Why-
Because,
that
Like,
seems
how
like-
long are us parents supposed to wait for that to be tested? Because
well, depending on the results that we find
it's a
next week,
safe feeling.
Well, depending on the results we find next week, we will, move expeditiously. This group has moved very quickly once, on all these things. I mean, we've been basically doing this for about a month. And in that time frame, I think you can find that, and I say you could ask some of the task force members, that we've moved very, in my experience, we've moved really, really quickly in some of these things.
But it's like what Dr. Rosenfeld was saying, is that at the high school, they didn't want to find PCBs. They had to do the soil sampling because they were doing work on the property. They didn't go in there to try to find it. And then they got into a thing of, oh, shoot, what are we going to do? We have to deal with this. I feel like here, we don't want to find them either. And unless there's somebody really looking, unless you're measuring the air, you're measuring the soil, you're not going to find them.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
And I don't understand why you didn't take the machine that was over there testing for them. Just bring it in here, test it here.
It was, again, we were following some recommendations by Dr. Rosenfeld.
Yeah.
We were following his recommendations. We sampled exactly.
He blended some of them. He wasn't completely happy.
Well, the locations were all,
But he wasn't completely happy with the results of that meeting. He just said,
well, the recommendation he gave to us as far as where to sample was produced before that meeting. And we just said, okay, we'll do it where he thought it was a good starting point.
So the next step then, after you find out what's happened over there,
right?
Maybe we test here.
Yeah, I'm not ruling any of that stuff out.
I guess I don't understand the relationship of why the testing results there
Would be relevant here.
on whether or not we test here.
Oh, it's not dependent. But it's relevant in the sense that because of the age of the building.
But we already know that the age of the buildings are similar, and we
Right.
already know there's a problem there.
Well, we don't know it's a problem.
Well,
That's
some
what.
materials, there's some kind of problem, right?
No, that's what we're trying to figure out in terms of this monitoring. In other words, we don't know. First of all, we don't know if it's in the caulk. We assume that that's a possibility. We're going to find that out. We don't know if it's gotten into the dust, and we don't know if it's in the air. So that's why we're doing this testing.
And what does that testing there have to do with what's here? They're different buildings, they're different spaces.
It's different. It's different buildings.
You can have a controlled study over there in the controlled group of
Right.
the number of classes, the random sampling we talked about.
Right.
That testing would not cover this area, so I'm not sure how that's going to give us any indication of what's
right.
happening.
What it basically helps us try to do is, and I'm gonna liken some stuff to asbestos and lead a little bit. Okay. When we know that there are similar materials being used at different places, like when they came through and they did asbestos sampling here in characterization here, they didn't sample, for example, every tile, but anything that looks similar, then they made an assumption that it was asbestos containing. So in the case of the other building, it's just the first step of trying to evaluate it. And at that point, there's a very good chance, I think, that depending on the results, that we're going to probably make a recommendation to do that kind of testing here to figure it out.
I'm sorry, it's just not answering my question.
Yes.
I understand the random sampling there.
Right.
But that does not explain why testing has not been done here, and it doesn't answer the question about why we're waiting. So you find it, you don't find it there. It still doesn't cover any kind of testing.
It was-
And who's making the protocol? I guess who's making the decision not to test here?
Well, no one's made a decision not to test here. All I'm saying is,
Not yet.
right. So,
Why not do it as
well, I'm saying this is, and again, you came in late, so I explained the first time, is that the decisions to do any of the sampling or any kind of testing is the part in the parlance of the task force. There's a task force made up of parents and teachers and a student and district administrators. So that group gets together, and when we meet, we talk about all of these questions. So these come up, and that decision's made then.
But I've been at every one of these meetings, and it never once came out that you weren't going to test here for the PCBs in the air until I got the note from Juan Cabrillo from Pam that said we were testing for radon.
I never said, no, we never said we weren't going to test here. I just
Okay,
I said, remember.
I'm frustrated that it's not happening in tandem with what's happening.
I understand your frustration. We had to start someplace, and we needed to get out in the field quickly. And what we did was we said, Dr. Rosenfeld said that he had specified certain areas, and we said, okay, as a representative of the parent group, we said we would do that, and that's what we did as a first cut. It's not.
but the district told a reporter that I think 2 weeks ago, that they were testing. They actually put it in that they were testing the soil. So did they not, the district lie to the,
I don't know any statement the district made. I don't know what the district said as
it
far
was
as that.
Mrs. Myers?
You know, that's a document, I don't recall that. I think that we were pretty, as far as I know, she read a statement a few weeks ago. This reporter right here was there.
You guys did a press conference after.
Right, and she read a statement at that press conference. I don't believe that talked about soils at that point.
Is everyone okay if I ask questions? I want to let all the parents first, but when everyone's...
Does anybody have any other questions? Yes.
Now, first of all, I'm really glad you're here. It's been helpful for me. Clearly, this is a very expansive and dynamic process. One of the things, you know, and there are a lot of good questions, and one of the things that I don't feel, maybe it's there, maybe I haven't seen it yet, but is there a roadmap? Is there a basic, in a layman's way of looking at the entire process for each school or for whatever segments of properties, looking at the entire cumulative educative property that you are able to provide, or that maybe is out there that I'm not aware of, that explains exactly what the process is by each type of chemical that's been mentioned, in terms of the gating items that lead you to make certain decisions, and a timeline, a general timeline in terms of what that takes?
Sure.
Because let me just add, I was aware of this meeting. There were a few emails, and so I saw them. I understand. I'm just saying I know that there were. And I get both, you know, the Malibu Middle School and also the Juan Cabrillo schools. But you know, to me, a lot of these questions are questions I think that are sort of coming from a lot of people. It's just a general lack of awareness of where we stand in this general process in terms of what the process is as well.
That's good. I appreciate your question. It's an uneven process to begin with, and then I appreciate people wanting answers and trying to get them as quickly as they can. I've been in your seat before, and I understand that wanting to have that. As the district goes forward, and we talked about this again at the task force meeting today, we have to look at a kind of a short-term, medium-term, long-term process. So the short term is trying to get this data that we've collected initially, look at it, analyze it, and figure out. A lot of times it will help us figure out what the next step's going to be. But in the bigger process, to answer your question, a lot of what we're dealing with here, a lot of it is a maintenance issue in terms of maintaining buildings, to make sure that the material's not getting out, make sure that materials aren't being brought in that could be problematic, that going forward, that there's a process in place. For example, when someone decides to drill a hole in a wall, right, or dig up a conduit, right, that you have to think about what's the impact that's going to be, and not just go in and do it. Well, but one of the things we want to do is we want to make sure that going forward, you don't do it again. So part of this is really building an awareness on the parts of all the stakeholder groups, right? So that's the district maintenance people, that's the custodial people, that's the teachers, that's the students, the parents, so that we understand what that is. And there is a program actually that the EPA has. It's called the Tools for Schools program. We've talked about it a little bit. It's a very it's a well-defined program. Again, we'll probably talk about it more, but if you're interested, you can go onto the EPA website and look at it. And it is, many schools have put it in place, and they're very effective because it deals with all these a lot of hazardous issues, and it has a framework for how to proceed. It has lots of forms and processes already in place so that every school district is not having to reinvent the wheel. So I think on a long-term basis, it's increasing the awareness of folks, it's putting these systems in place so that when a question comes up, and I think that we've started to do it actually here at Cabrillo. There was a teacher a week or so ago had a question about some dust that was falling down, and was concerned about asbestos, so she sent an email to Dr. Hart and to the principal, and we were able to respond in 2 days and check it out. Turned out not to be. And we're documenting that more. We had a faculty meeting this morning. I think it was really productive, so that when people have questions, one of the questions is how well is this documented? This is the start of the documentation. And it'll change in terms of process, but if we have it, then we can track it through the system. You know, who's it going to, how quickly it's going to. And so long-term, those are the kind of infrastructure pieces that need to be put in place. I don't know if I hopefully answered your
I
question.
think that was, directionally, good. From my standpoint, though, typically, I work in a business environment, when we look at initiatives or projects or things that, that are complicated in a large scale,
Right.
we typically design flow charts, we design,
Right.
all sorts of analysis, and we start with different aspects of what we're looking for and different timelines and how we're going to approach each
Right.
one of those.
Right.
And again, just from a very layman's standpoint, it would be, in my opinion, helpful to know exactly what we're potentially testing for, what we know we're testing for, what we don't know but suspect we may be testing for next, what the gating items are for each one of those tests in
Right.
each of the geographically disparate areas of the campus.
100%, and that's ultimately where we want to get to. And a lot of the flow charts and things we're talking about are in actually this Tools for Schools program. So it flow charts it out, it tells certain steps to look at for certain things. And and then we customize it for being site specific. That's typically how it works. So yeah.
Is that going to be provided then at some point?
Yeah, once we develop, it would be in the it has to be developed. It's probably a more mid-range kind of thing to do, because right now, again, we're trying to get the information in that we have, get it out, get people to be able, so that people can see it, see where we stand right now, to try to get some sense of what kind of magnitude of an issue we've got going. That's really what we're trying to figure out.
If I could just step in,
Yes.
Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, I think what Robert's suggesting though is a tool by which to do what you just said
Right.
in a visual format that would be effective for everyone to access and read.
Right.
And I don't think that we're seeing that. So that's what he's
Yeah.
suggesting. But if you're saying that's a mid-range action item, then it's not going to be it's going to be not oriented. We're looking for orientation.
Right, for mid-range, I'm talking about after getting this initial round of samples figured out. It won't be tomorrow, because our first focus this coming week is to get the information out. But certainly high on the priority list, and we can take this back to the task force, having that, because this is important feedback, is to get that. But that's exactly what needs to be done. Exactly. Yeah.
Can I just, I didn't finish and I didn't know the facts, but the diesel, the 10,000 gallons that you were asking about,
Two 10,000
two
gallon tanks.
10,000 gallons, they were leaking. That's fact. And they were taken out in 1985, but nothing has been done to test around the soil, and that's, I think, up near the gym, near the field.
I thought they tested
They
that.
tested it.
Yeah.
That's the list I read.
Yeah, I thought they tested it.
They
It came
got
up positive.
for a lot of that.
Yeah, I think it was pretty far down. I have to go back and look and see if,
But what will you do to make sure that leaking soil where your kids play up in the fields is not a problem?
well, I believe it was down about 14 or 15 feet, if I'm not mistaken, right? Probably if it's a tank.
They found in those tanks leaking arsenic, cadmium, lead, benzene, toluidine, DDT, chlorodan in the soil. And then that's what they also found down here, which is why the EPA is sort of connecting the dots. And you quote the EPA, but why don't you just talk to somebody who did Love Canal and Beverly Hills and Buena Vista, and he knows you, and just talk to him, because he's
Yeah,
a senior analyst. We're lucky to have
I'm
him.
happy to speak to anybody. There's no question. I'm
But
happy to
he's
speak to
asking
him.
you to test the soil.
Well, I haven't spoken to him, so I mean, it's
Well, I know
worth
that's
a
what he
conversation. So I'm happy to have him,
And the
have him
other
call me.
thing-
Just call them.
Yeah.
Just call him, I'll give you his number.
Okay.
Can you explain also where that tank was? I'm sorry, you said it was up in the,
It was up by the gym and the field.
okay,
So that's why we're worried about the soccer field and the football field.
like this field is.
No, not in the
No,
field.
it's a high school.
The high school.
Yeah.
But, and then there was some feeling it leaked and then
It
kind
was,
of ran
it was
downhill.
two 10,000 gallon drums, and I just read you. it
Yeah,
was
the other thing I'll commit to doing
That was a maintenance issue as well, I didn't expect to find it.
is
Yeah.
we do have a series they're sort of rolling out slowly as we have these frequently asked questions. So all the questions that were submitted, I don't know if we have people capturing these today, but they're all good questions. I'll try to remember to put them out. But we have them on the website, because the questions you're asking are good questions. People will ask the same ones, and we're trying to respond to some of these things. What I'll do is, I'll take a look at the Arcadius report again and just see what that is. And if you send me, use...
Actually, I gave it to her and his phone number, and
Okay.
he would love to hear from
Okay, great.
The Beverly Hills High School, they tested for radionuclides as well. Is that what you're testing for too? Because it was obviously built over an oil well.
Yeah, so the radionuclides in Beverly Hills, interesting. It was not from naturally occurring sources. They used it for tracers, as a tracer.
Cleaning the oil?
No, for tracers. It's a tracer to check oil levels and things like that. So they'd shoot it down there. So they were actually adding it. And yeah, I was right there with them when the county health department came out, radiation unit, and tested and found it to be
But you
fine.
settled. $30 million.
I don't know what facts you're going to, if you want to talk about that, I'm happy to discuss it, but as far as the radionuclides go, it was done, it's a contained kind of thing. It's used as a tracer, and the health department was there and watched it.
I was going to tell you another roadmap that's very interesting is a book by George Horowitz. Does anyone know the name of it?
Can we, sorry.
High school,
Was
American
there
high school.
also testing for mold done? at
Yes,
the time?
yes.
And what-
Well, there was some testing done, I don't know recently here, but what we did recently was there was some mold in, I think Nancy, in your room. So there was some visible mold seen, and the standard of care is if you see visible mold, you eliminate it. Now, the reason the mold was there was because it appears to be a structural problem with the building. So we removed the visible mold, and now the district has, in the process of looking at bringing in what we call a forensic architect or forensic construction person to see what's the source and how to eliminate the water intrusion. So we won't have that for it.
So two related questions to that. One is that addresses visible mold, but more equally as problematic is mold that is not visible. So have we tested for that? And then my second question is, what was the process and procedure and materials used to remove the mold? Because sometimes the removal of mold, we're using substances that are just as toxic sometimes as the mold.
Right. So there's the methodology is actually, going back to New York again, there's something called the New York Guidelines for mold removal. It's a pretty standardized practice, and it specifies what to do based on the amount of mold being removed at the time. This was relatively, based on those guidelines, a fairly small amount. And so they wipe it down, and they're supposed to use basically a surfactant, like a soap, to take it off, to remove it so that you're not bringing in other types of chemical agents like bleach or things like that. So they wipe it down, make sure it's been removed visibly there, and they followed I told them to follow those guidelines.
And what are the guidelines?
The New York.
Yeah, but I don't know.
Oh yeah. Oh, so basically that's what I'm saying. So they go in and they take a surfactant, a soap, and wipe it down so it's all visibly removed, and that's fundamentally what it is. The mold is removed. Yeah.
Yeah, but when mold's coming out of the wall, that means it's inside the wall.
Well, not necessarily. It depends on where it is. It could be growing on the surface, or it could be in the wall cavity.
So how do you know if it's in there or not if you don't open it up?
Well, that's the thing. So that's what we're doing is trying to bring in this forensic person to look at, and I assume that part of their scope of work will be to look at these things too.
So then, that would be just where the mold has been visibly identified. Are there plans to do mold testing in other areas where is it invisible or not?
Right. So we're trying to get the cues from this forensic architect. Have him look at the building, because it's problematic not in just one location but the building. So I think we're waiting to see what they will recommend and go from there at this stage. Okay.
Mark, I had a question. I know you were involved in Beverly Hills High School.
Yeah.
Were you also hired in 1999 by the district to do some testing and provide a report for Beverly Vista Elementary School after a number of their students got sick?
We were doing I was involved with that. That was my first work.
And you were checking or testing for benzene and formaldehyde?
We looked at all those, looked at a number of
Did you
them.
find any results at all that showed that there was any levels of benzene and formaldehyde?
I have to go back and look at it. We found actually we found some levels that were traced to building materials that were used by the maintenance staff. So there were some materials in there.
Were they elevated levels?
In certain cases, well, I don't know, I have to go back and look at it. It's been a long time, but these were portable classrooms, and it was done at the time that there was, following the earthquake. So the idea was to make sure that they were, and the children were only in there for, until the place could be repaired. So what our interests were trying to make sure that, that they were healthy and safe in the areas, and I'd have to go back and look at the data again. It's been a while since I've seen it.
Are you aware that Joy Horowitz in her book wrote down there that she felt that there was extremely high levels, and they had been in the report, and the report had never been released by you?
Every report had been released. There was nothing that was held back. I'd like to address the book because, I like to do that because there's a couple of books, just for the record. There's a book, if you want to see, is the people referring to it, it's a book written by Joe Horowitz. There's another book written by Norma Zager, and I suggest you look at that to get some balance. I was fortunate or unfortunate to be in both of those books and talk about this. One of the things about each of these books, and I think in the long, because the Beverly Hills things come up a few times, that at the end of the day, the Buena Vista thing was sort of separate from the oil well issue. This happened several years beforehand. But at the end of the day, in the case of the oil well scenario, and in the case of both the Beverly Vista situation, it was important that the community came together. The community spent, I think, well over $1 million doing testing.
The district?
The district did.
The school district?
The school district and the city did $1 million worth of testing.
But the parents?
No. This was all put by the...
And your company was hired as well?
Well, we were involved with it, so was the Air Quality Management District and the County of Los Angeles Health Department. So it was, and other consultants. Huh?
The same people?
No, actually, that was radiological health. And we worked with the AQ&D.
Cousin and Matt were involved though?
COSIN was USC, so they were involved at that time too. On the
They're involved here, right? You mentioned them.
The district brought them in or had some contact with them. I haven't had any direct contact.
I won't ask anymore. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right. That's all right. Well, let me try to explain. So at the end of the day, in that particular case, there were several hundred cases that were, I think, over 700 cases that were filed. It went through a long process of depositions and trial, and didn't get to trial, actually. It got to court, and the judge threw the case out, summary judgment, which means there was insufficient evidence to support the claims. That's the bottom line.
Then why the settlement?
There was the only settlement that occurred. I don't know about the
$1 million settlement.
There was a settlement maybe made by one of the oil companies from that standpoint, but the district and the city actually got about $500,000 back from plaintiff attorneys because of what happened. And if you see at the end of Joy's book, at the very end, there's an addendum, and she spells all this out. So for completeness, that's in there as well. So there was not enough evidence to support these contentions. I'm not saying that people weren't sick or didn't have a problem, but in terms of the environmental, just for the record.
That's, I guess, what we're concerned about. We're talking about transparency, and
So
Beverly Hills High School people were getting sick. Your company got involved, and nothing was found. Beverly Vista, people were getting sick. Your company got involved, nothing was found.
No.
Now you're involved here.
No.
We want to make sure that the proper testing is done.
Sure, for sure.
And our children are safe.
And at the same time, we had a similar process. We had a group of students and teachers and parents, similar to what we had here. Again, remember,
We're all parents.
Well, I understand
All parents are going to be upset.
So the community, the idea is that the community is the one, in each case, the community gets involved and decides the process. My role is to provide information and as a staff resource to the group. It's not you know.
I know, but
that's
that
a-
group was handpicked
Yeah, I mean, where's
by the very people
Well, it was
who
picked,
have the most to lose.
well,
The
no,
architect being on the
it was,
task
I
force.
had nothing to do with the selection of the group.
Well, where's the people that are involved?
That's what
Where's
I
the
wanna
people
find
that are
out.
responsible so we can
Why
talk
Why
to
didn't they
them?
tell us when they first
You
moved
can
2
certainly
years
call the
ago?
district up. and
Who do
talk
we
to
talk
them.
to that's gonna make the decisions about how the testing is done? That's the thing that's frustrating. I've been to every one of these meetings. I've spoken at every one of them. I've talked to Rosenthal. I saw you last time at Malibu High. I don't understand, like, and then now all of a sudden this is the way it's being done. It's frustrating for me, and I come back to my point over and over, but it's frustrating to me that soil samples aren't taken from different locations, all over the place, all over the swamp area, and then they're just compared. It's that simple. Take a soil sample from here, take it from the right outside there, take 50,
Actually, the
throw them
EPA
out,
offered
put
to
them
come
out
in
there,
and
and then I can rest assured.
And I'm not saying that's not going to happen. All I'm saying is we had to.
But it hasn't happened.
If it's a matter of money, the Environmental Protection Agency has already offered to come in and do it.
And I think, and that's fine. When
All you
I'll
have
be
to
happy
do
to
is
speak
make
to
a
them.
phone call.
I'm happy to speak to them and we'll talk to them. I mean,
So
I'm
what
happy
do
to
we
do that.
do then to push for that to happen? Who do we talk to?
I-
I say, let's get 50 soil samples, randomly.
Or we just
throw
need to
here.
pull our kids out to make them hear us.
Well, look,
Or you pull your kids out
Well,
of
I mean,
school.
that's
so they
another
can
option,
hear us.
because I feel like
Don't
this is
send
all
them
very
out.
shady.
go.
I
I
feel
mean,
like
that's
we're
pretty
not getting the
much-
information.
That's pretty much where I'm at. I'm about to pull my son in because it's
I
hurry
agree.
up and wait. But
Well,
what if our
next-
kids are in
next-
some toxic environment?
next week-
And we're waiting for what?
well, next week, you're going to have some, you know, we'll have the
Over
results.
there, but not over here.
Well, and that's the next step, is if we, and I encourage you, listen, you can
But
talk to the
there's
folks.
already found there. This is the thing that's frustrating. It's not like there might have been PCBs up there. Let's test to figure out for sure. They already found it. They removed them. It didn't go well in 2011.
Well, it did, I mean, as far as I know, it went well. I mean, it was
but
removed.
then now there's been people getting sick. And so the reason why I say it didn't go well is because when they dug up the trench underneath the school,
Right.
you know, and then there's some indication they didn't test for PCBs in there. It didn't go well for the school district because they didn't reveal a lot of this information that's now coming out. It didn't go well. It doesn't look, at least PR-wise, like it went well. And now we're not testing, we're testing for radon and mold. Fine, great. That's the stuff that's already found there. They found the PCBs. That's a scientific fact.
Right.
They did remove it. Maybe they got it, maybe they didn't. Maybe their removal caused more problems. I don't understand why we're not testing for the thing they found there here.
And I'm not saying we're not going to do it. All I'm saying is, we had to start someplace.
But
We
when are we
used,
gonna do it?
well, next week, when we meet with the task force
When in the
again,
soil? When do you think we can
Well,
do it? Because I'm more worried about the soil.
I appreciate that. So next week, when we meet with the task force, we'll bring up, you know, we have people here, we'll bring up your concern.
Can we be there? How do we?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we had some guests. We have it's a very, frankly, it's a small room, but I would say if you want to
Why
speak
don't
with
we
the
have it
principal.
public? Let's have it public in the auditorium.
Well, yeah, I mean, part of it is trying to get the business done we need to get done. I think if you want
You
to,
want transparency, have it public, bring the press in, let's have it
well,
transparent.
I think it's not up to me to make that decision, but, you know, we can do.
Who is it up to?
It's-
Who's the name that we have to talk to?
It's usually brought up to the task force as a whole. But I would start, look, if you want to do that, write the copy of the principal, send an email to the superintendent, and then they make the decision on who attends.
So it's not the task force, it's the principal and the
Well, I'm saying that's the
superintendent?
starting point. What they'll do is they will circulate that, and then we get the input from the task force.
Is Pam in the task force? Who's the task force?
Yeah, Pam sits in.
Okay.
And Nancy.
Because I think that's just the central thing, is the stuff they found there. Like, there's mold, sure, like, everybody's scared of mold, but let's test for the stuff they found there that we think is a problem. Let's test around here, and let's make it, you know, as opposed to just testing all around the building, do some testing around the building, sure, but do a little bit of testing in the field. The places that would make the parents feel better to know that it's not there. The field, the playground, up at the,
Eli?
where people eat the food.
I don't think we really know what we should be testing or not.
But we know what they found
I'm not a scientist,
there.
you're not a scientist, and I think that's what my question was, is what should we be doing? And there's no roadmap. I mean,
There's two-
I'm not saying there's not, I'm just saying,
Call the
you know, you
EPA and
see,
talk
let me
to
just
them.
finish,
Call the
okay?
EPA.
I'm not talking a whole lot this time, I just don't know where we start and where we end. I don't know what the process is. It hasn't been mapped out, you know, and you know, I think that by and large, a lot of these questions are coming about. And by the way, that wasn't meant as a slant to you at all. It's just, we're not scientists.
But,
Because we don't know about what the process should be, we don't really know even what questions we should be asking.
Sure.
We need to see a roadmap.
Right.
We need to see what the suspected issues are. We need to see what the protocols are for resolving, or identifying, diagnosing what the issues
Absolutely.
truly are, and then what the next steps are
And
beyond
part of
that.
it is an iterative, it's an
Because I
iterative.
had never heard about the gas tank before. I was aware of the mold. I was, a lot of these things I've heard about, but once again, what I'm looking for is, where are we? Where do we go? What are we going to do? And, so that we can all keep our wits about us.
Sure.
And just continue. And I think it's just, to me, it just seems like there's a general lack of communication here that needs to happen.
Absolutely.
And I don't know that it's this, intentional. I just feel like that's so often the case in much of life. I think this is possibly one of those instances where the best intentions are being misconstrued because there's just not a proper amount of communication that's handed to people in a way that they understand it.
Right. So
Us being the people.
So next week is when the data start to flow out, And what I would encourage you to do is once you see that, then we'll be in a position too. I appreciate your frustration. I do. And part of our response was to try to do something pretty quickly. To do the kind of thing you're talking about, which is correct, takes a little bit more time to do that, but there was a need for information in a fairly quick way. So we did this initial review, and then once that's completed, now we'll be able to look at broader things in terms of looking at other sources. Usually what you're trying to do is...
Well, first of all, I think that's a good thing, and that's the first I'm hearing of it.
Yeah, so
it's good that we know at least that much.
Right.
But then again, what's the game plan after that?
Well,
so once again, just as a group of people who are not, by and large, scientifically oriented towards the area that you're involved with,
Right.
for me at least, and I think I speak for a lot of people here, I think it would be really helpful to understand from that point, where do we go? And it would have been helpful even to know what the initial game plan was. Where are we going to start? We're going to establish a baseline. It's going to be a scientific baseline.
Right.
And then from there, we're going to go here, there, or wherever.
And I hear you, and I think in our need to try to work quickly, we may not have done such a good job of communicating as we should have. So I take that as a definitely area for improvement, no question about that. So normally speaking, what we're trying to do is when you decide on the kind of sampling you do, the kind of evaluation is, you're looking for sources of a given contaminant, and then you're trying to figure out, listen, if there's in this case PCBs we were talking about, we have a hypothesis that it's from the building materials, so we're going to test that. So that's usually how we look at it. When you look at mold, that's a little more obvious because you see it there or you suspect it. So usually you're looking at a source of contaminant and then you're testing for that contaminant associated with it. But you're right, in a big picture thing, moving on to the next step is looking at, okay, do we need to broaden this sampling program? What areas do we need to broaden it to? Part of it is trying to get the feedback from folks like yourself to be able to give that information about what the concerns are. That's why we met initially with the teachers, try to, as a starting point. So a lot of this initial sampling what was done was based on those initial feedback. And so some of this stuff is now 3 weeks or 4 weeks old. Now we can move on to the next level.
Thank you.
I have a daughter who was removed from the middle school while the school was being tested, and so she was put into classrooms here. So although I'm not actually technically a Cabrillo parent, I have an interest in what's going on in both schools, because I don't want to feel that my daughter was taken from one school that is suspected of being contaminated and put into another school.
Sure.
That because it's of the same vintage is under the same suspicion. So in trying to take this and make it really concrete in a way that the Cabrillo parents can know what's going to happen next, is it correct to say that you're testing for the PCBs and to see if they're connected to the caulk over at the middle school there? And if the caulk is found to be a culprit, will you then come look at the caulk here? And if it's the same caulk here, will you then do the same tests here that were being done over there?
Yeah, or we might just assume it and go right to remediation or to fixing things. I mean, that's part of it. So we may need to do more testing, or we may go sometimes like that, like just in the area of mold, right? If we see the mold, we need to remove it. There's no need to to test that mold. I'm not talking about hidden mold, I'm talking about the mold that we see. So the first thing is to make sure that we work quickly to make sure that if there's any risk issues that we're dealing with that right
So
away.
when you say that what's happening there is relevant to what's happening here, you mean that what you find over there may mean you don't even have to test here, you're just going to start fixing things?
Well, yeah, I mean, if for example, if we find high levels of caulk and that caulk indicates that there's some releases going on or material coming off, and we come over here and we see that the caulk is broken up, we'll just assume that it's just like with asbestos, right? Sometimes we just assume it is, and we're going to take care of it right off.
And I think a lot of the urgency that we're hearing here is also because we know that the younger the child, the higher the risk.
Clearly.
So this is an elementary school.
Yep.
Not that our middle schoolers are not young, I have an 11-year-old,
Right.
you know, but still, it's important.
No, I get that. I get that.
I just gotta say that I keep feeling like there's these red herrings, and alarm bells go off when I hear that this is all because of caulk. And it just, my alarm bells are ringing. It's going like, come on, the whole nation was using the same caulk, probably.
Right.
You can't tell me, and then they'll test other areas where not all elevated high levels of PCB in
And
the
mold
house.
doesn't cause
So it just doesn't ring to me, it doesn't make sense that
What?
it all came from caulk.
Well, yeah.
Or it came from the ballasts.
Dallas, yeah,
Dallas.
yeah. Well, there's
And if that's true, then the whole nation would
That's-
be an epidemic.
It's, well,
Of
the
PCBs.
problem is nationwide, you know, if you go to, and you can look at Boston or
So
New
is that as
York.
part of your point is then if we test any school or any building built before 1972, you're going to have elevated levels to the point that are hazardous to
Well,
children's health.
we're going to find that there's a good chance if we test these building materials that we will find PCBs in the building materials. Now, whether that's a hazard or not is determined on the condition of that material. In other words, is it broken up? Is it releasing material into the, you know, can it be dusted up? Is it in a point where people can contact it to disperse it? So part of it is knowing number one, is it present? And then number two, is there a potential for release? And that's the questions that we need to find
So,
out.
but then as part of your thesis, as somebody who works in this, and doing this all your life, that if you go looking, you'll find it anywhere, any building built before 1978, that
There's a good chance that between, you know, buildings built from the 50s on, if it's got those building materials, if it's got caulk is one thing, there's some other building materials that were usually used as what we call plasticizers.
Yeah.
So any kind of things that adhesives and glues and things like that, that's where you found most of it. So yeah, there's a real good chance it will be found in the material. Wait, just, I think one question.
I'm going to back you on that. It is frequent enough that EPA has a fact sheet specifically about, for teachers in schools specifically about PCBs and caulk. So it is very frequent. Okay? It's not, in fact, I would expect, that doesn't mean there's hazardous exposures in all cases, but yes, it is very frequent.
so it's the caulk.
Yeah, but let's not forget here that this all started because people are coming down with cancer.
Yeah.
They're coming down a short time period and very specific cancers.
Right. And
So people are getting sick, there's something there. And what concerns me though is we're saying, okay, the PCB testing we're doing there, the results that come up from that is going to determine what happens to the school over here.
well, not
Maybe.
Maybe.
And the part that bothers me is that the testing is on horizontal surfaces. So you take a test off the floor that's been washed hundreds of times since that dirt was dug up. The dirt was dug up.
Well, that
You take it maybe off of a
shelf?
a horizontal surface, a shelf, or a desk, we don't know,
yeah.
and nothing comes up there. So, okay, so they say, okay, then that's not it. So maybe there's a little bit in the caulk, so we're just gonna rip the caulk off and everything's good. We need to get the soil tested. The soil
soil's
test is
a
positive. Soil test is 11 times above the legal limit.
I've heard you, and I
It
said we're
needs to be done.
going to be bringing it to the
I'm with
task
him.
force. Okay, I hear you.
I wouldn't mind if Christine, since she came, and we do need the press to know about what's going on. Could she ask you a few questions?
Yes, if everybody is done,
We do need to.
Yeah, we need to wrap
in the
up.
next few minutes, because we have an instrumental music playing
Okay,
today.
okay.
But-
little concert.
but
Could she ask you?
I
Is
think a
everybody-
pretty straightforward question, yes or no.
Go ahead.
Okay, so first off, when you said that the quad area, the middle part of the soil tested positive for PCBs, or tested negative rather, Did you test it for the cadmium, the benzene, the chloridam? Were any of those things found?
I didn't do any of that testing, so I can't, that's in the Arcadis report, and I would direct you to that, because I can't really recall specifically on those things. So
Okay, and
I was involved with that.
And can you explain why you're even testing for radon right now and not radionuclides?
Because there was no known source of radionuclides, and in the campus, as far as when we asked people, there's no laboratories here, there's no isotope work being done. But radon is naturally occurring.
But why did you test for radon? What led you to? I know it's naturally occurring. In many
It's naturally
areas.
occurring, and there was this Department of Health Services in the state of California has mapped out certain areas, and Malibu as a whole has a low to moderate potential for radon, so we figured we would.
Is that linked to the types of cancers that would be popping up?
No, it's not.
I just don't understand why radon. And then lastly, the soil that was dug up in the classroom, right as school was starting, was that tested? Was that soil tested yesterday?
I don't believe it was.
It was not.
It was not, and there were no
Inside the classrooms was trenched, and it was not tested, you know.
Right, it was, as far as I know, it was not.
And the workers were not protected, even though we knew again.
Again, a lot of these questions are for the district, because it was before my involvement, so I'm getting it from
We asked the
information.
same questions at the high school meeting, and you said then that you were going, and so did the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District Chief Financial Officer Jan Mays said that she would get the answers.
Yep,
It's been a few weeks now since October 24th when that meeting occurred. Where are those answers?
I'll mention it to her again, where we are. We're trying-
It would be informative to have follow-up clarification. Jan Mays said that the reason that the testing was not done inside the classrooms that were trenched is because the inside, those classrooms were on native soil versus non-native soil in the quad. That needs further clarification. We need to understand and be explained from the district level what that means, and also why no testing was done inside the classrooms in which dirt was dug up just 4 or 5 feet from where dirt that had been dug up 2 years prior was found to contain PCBs.
Right.
Why not test it? You need to give those answers. It's been a few weeks since the October 24th
And I'll-
meeting. You should have those answers for these people.
Well, I'll talk to Jan about it, because she's the one who was there at the time.
So when and where can we see those answers provided?
Right.
Let's give you a
That-
deliverable.
Right, so
and a
those
deadline. When,
are
where?
part of the FAQs, and I'll make a point to ask them to try to get those out this week.
This week, as of tomorrow.
No, I'm sorry, next week, sometime next week.
And none of the test results from next week are going to include soil testing, correct? It's all going to be the PCBs,
None of them
209.
will include soil.
So still no definitive, clear-cut date for soil testing.
There's nothing on the table right now.
Why not?
Because as I mentioned, I think you came in a little late, so.
I did.
So we discussed that about the
We did
process.
discuss it, but just for the record,
Yeah.
it certainly doesn't make sense to me, the answer.
Well, it's part of the,
They promised us too.
it's part,
Mrs. Myers
it's
promised
part of the process, as I say, was that the task force will take all this information, the input that you had tonight, and we'll discuss it at the next meeting, which will be next Thursday.
But also in all fairness, this has been clearly articulated by the parents of Juan Cabrillo for many weeks now. So this is not new information that needs to be, matriculated and processed.
Right.
It's something that's been made clear, the requests have been made, and yet there's still no action plan, and that's where the frustration is.
No, I understand that, and this is, like I said, this is my first opportunity to talk to the Cabrillo parents directly, and then we talked about it at the
But
high
certainly
school.
you've heard this information, and if you
I think
haven't,
so.
then there's a breakdown in the system, and we need a better process, because if you haven't gotten the information
Right.
that we've been asking for these things for many weeks,
We-
then that's
Right,
another
so that's why
problem that needs to be addressed.
that's why we said this was an initial testing to try to get the information that was, as a starting point, and then information going forward. So I understand the frustration, and we'll definitely bring it up at the task force. And then we'll get back to the people here, we'll communicate back to you as to what was decided at that time. We'll bring it up next week.
So would it be fair to say that you're kind of here to just kind of let us know that you're in process, and there's really, I feel bad for you on one hand because you don't have anything to tell us other than wait, things are being done, and your questions are going to have to wait.
No, I think, again, I'm not sure which,
Well, no,
when you came in.
next week, you're
Right,
saying.
so my-
it's really, like, because there's no one here from the task force, and there's no one's
No,
here.
there is people from the task force.
Oh, you're here? Okay, all right. But,
Who messed it all
Right.
up in the first place? You need
so,
to-
because that would have helped us.
No, I understand it.
Who are
I
coming in
understand.
new, and that there's all this history.
Yeah.
And that it's kind of, it's, you know, excuse me for saying, it's a little suspicious that no one's here
No, I know, I
with
understand.
the
No,
history
they-
that could educate us
Right.
in a 20 minutes. And you're like, well, you know, I wasn't there, I don't know, I'll get back to you. So,
Right.
so anyway.
So I think the next time, that's a good point. The next time
Yeah.
that we have, we'll have district people here.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I know we have a variety of people on the task force that are in some Korea, but maybe we could get a parent from Korea on the task force. We don't have a parent.
Oh, we don't?
We have teacher and support staff and stuff. But I'm wondering maybe
It's
we
a
could-
task force
maybe there's a parent. Maybe there's a parent here that's interested in being on the task force, then I'm happy to bring that forward. Because it'd be nice to have a parent.
I think you do need a
member
parent, yeah, on a task
from
force.
Rio. Could be a
A parent with a shovel.
You want to be
Well,
there?
Well, Nancy's talking.
So think about that,
Parent
if
as
you're
well,
interested
she's a
in
parent
it,
teacher.
let me know,
The meeting-
email me.
the meetings go
because I
from
think that
10
would
to
be great
12
have
on
for real
Thursday.
parents.
Okay. Are you on the task force?
Yes,
Okay.
but, and so is Joe Lily, and so is Nancy Levy, but it'd be nice to have a parent, because
Okay.
you know, you talk to parents and you have a different perspective than you live in Malibu, so it'd be
And I
great.
think you also need to know that when this started, remember it started at Malibu High with the whole dirt thing? And so in order to act quickly, a task force was put together quickly.
2 years.
And now it's spreading over, you know, we're realizing that, okay, Cabrillo is involved. And so there really hasn't been a lot of time to really get organized. And it's obvious to me as a, you know, as a staff member and as a community member, that yes, we absolutely need to have representation from Cabrillo as well.
We
And
kind of pushed our way in.
Yeah.
How
Fortunately,
come the district didn't let us know? That's what they didn't let us know about the poison, all the stuff that was found in the dirt. It was way off in some tiny little part of their literature. Why wouldn't they have told us?
I think that's a really good question.
But that's the only question, because I really think they should resign.
I don't know the answer to that.
Maybe, and everybody else is maybe at risk. It's something we need to know. Myers and Lieberman and Lyon need to resign.
Can I say that historically, and Mr. Ketchum, I don't know if you're all aware of all the politics, but historically, representation and mistrust have been an issue between Malibu and the district for quite a long time. So I'd like to put in a vote for that Cabrillo parent on the task force, because I think this is a great opportunity for us to start mending some of those problems we've had with representation and transparency and
Right.
trust, and that's a good way to
Mr.
start.
Ketchum, could you explain why the people on the task force were chosen?
I was involved in that process, so.
But I'd like to have an explanation of that from the
I-
district, because
sure.
my reading of who's on the task force says it's a whitewash.
Well, I don't
Why
know.
wasn't it open to anybody who wanted to put the effort in and the time in? Why were those particular people chosen?
I would suggest you might hear from these task force members and feel,
You really?
see what you
Well,
think.
I don't know their exact criteria. I know that the people that are on the task force, the parents in particular, Heather Anderson, Seth Jacobson, very active in AMPS. AMPS is a huge voice for the Malibu parent community right now, so it's important to have that representation. And AMPS is an organization that is looking at, you know, the rights of Malibu parents as far as, you know, having rights within this district, but we feel that there's been an issue with that. So Seth is on there, Heather Anderson is on there, Jennifer DeNicola is on there, and Sonia Pearl, who was a Webster parent, is now a Malibu High School parent. And I have to say, as a staff member, I've watched these parents at the task force, and they've asked tough questions. They question everything. They question why we're doing this, how much of this are we doing, why aren't we doing it here? I mean, they're very proactive, and they're very concerned with what the parents at large are feeling. And they're saying things at the meetings like, you know, well, that's not going to fly with our parents. Our parents want to know this. Our parents want to have this information. And we have a great group of parents. And as a parent, somebody that raised their children here and next door, I'm very proud of the parents we have on there because I think they're asking all the right questions. I think
Really,
they're-
I'm concerned, and you know why I'm concerned, so let's see those task force meetings streamed.
Yes, exactly. We have a video camera for every one of the meetings we've had with you in public. There's been a video camera. Let's have the task force meetings recorded.
Open
Open it up, make it interactive, anybody can watch it, anybody can
Why
send it.
aren't the task force meetings recorded?
I have no idea. We ever thought about
But
it.
they must be.
Well, I mean, I thought about this, and you're shutting down every camera besides the one you have.
Thought about this
You're
as
not
an
allowed to press
opportunity
in
to try
here,
to make sure we
but
can
the
get it
task
out for
force
parents
meetings
at night.
behind closed doors.
So we can't use this video in a few days because if the story's done, they know.
No, I'm going to do this.
Who made the decision not to have the news come in? Doesn't task
Well,
force
we have
decision
a
not have the camera?
Yeah, there's no cameras.
No, that's not a task force decision. I think that's a district policy decision, isn't it?
Oh, that's the district?
No, we didn't have it at the last current meeting, so we reconsidered. Okay.
Yeah, these have to be, this is a public school, it needs to be open to public media.
It's not to me.
Well, we'll bring it back to this, all these issues will be brought back to the.
Mark, thank you for coming.
Okay.
Thank you, thank you.
It's up to somebody else.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.